Good evening, Racket Athlete fans. This is another episode of the Racket Athlete podcast. Today we have on Michele Riechman from in the States. She specializes in health for women over the age of 40 with nutrition and also a bit about strength training. Welcome to the show, Michele.
Thanks so much for having me.
Brilliant. Yeah, it's such a pleasure to be speaking to you today. So what I'm going to ask you to do, just to quickly start off, is Michele, it's really just talk a bit about yourself, your background, where you've come from, and where you've gotten to today.
Yeah, so I am also a mom of four. So I've been in that place and still am where time is fleeting. And so I really like to focus on quick things, simple, going back to basics. I also have my doctorate in physical therapy or physiotherapy. Um, I currently don't work as one, but I have more transitioned into the health and wellness and prevention side, but I bring that information with me as I'm working with clients. And I found as a mom, when I just had three kids, I was just struggling to keep up with my own health. And I remember going up a flight of stairs and being out of breath. And it's like, I don't want this, but everything seems so busy. Like, how do I even take care of myself?
Yeah,
And going up a flight of stairs doesn't take long. Like, we don't have to even do 30-minute workouts. Like, so I started with 10-minute workouts. I do sometimes do 30 minutes, but I rarely do anything longer than 30 minutes, and went back to some basic nutrition and really just being able to simplify nutrition and health, help people move away from that diet culture that just seems to draw us in and really go back to the basics and focusing on what's going to nourish my body, what's going to help me have a good relationship with food and with exercise.
yeah, that's great. So, yeah, I mean, you've kind of obviously got your background story about obviously where you've come from. Um, Obviously today we're going to try and focus a bit more on about the strength training. We can touch on other things as well, but let's talk about from your perspective strength training for women, for example.
Yeah, it's really important because as we age, we can start to lose muscle mass. And a lot of women sometimes will stray away from strengthening, or if someone is thinking they want to lose weight, they might go towards cardio. But strength training really has a lot of benefits. With cardio, we burn a lot of calories at once, but a lot of times that also makes us more hungry and want more food because we burn so many calories at once. With strength training, it's more of a slow burn. So you're going to burn less calories in that session, but as your muscles are repairing, rebuilding, you're going to burn calories after you finish strength training too. And when we think of someone like in their 80s, we picture somebody who is more frail, and that's because they have been losing muscle mass. So we really need to make sure that we are maintaining our muscle mass or potentially even gaining muscle mass and strengthening. And this is also when people are dieting and losing weight drastically, they're typically losing muscle mass with it.
Yeah,
And we do not want to do that. We want to lose fat mass. We don't want to lose any of our muscle mass. So I just want to say, so if you are thinking about dieting or you want to lose weight fast or do something quick, you don't want to lose muscle weight. And typically, if you're losing a lot of weight at once, that is what happens. So we want to eat in a way that's going to help us continue to build our muscle mass. So we need to make sure that we're getting protein because protein is the building block. And we need to make sure that we're having these strength training sessions where we're working our muscles to really build and maintain that muscle mass as we're getting older.
yeah. So a couple of things I'd like to just go back to that you mentioned there. How would people start to recognize? You talked about how you do cardio, for example, and you know you're obviously burning a lot of calories, but people, how would you recognize that you're losing muscle mass as such if you're not doing enough strength training?
Yeah, you won't really know it unless you're measuring it. Like some people have the watches that tell them. I mean, it gives you an idea. Sometimes there's scales that you can use, or sometimes different centers offer it. But if you don't have any of that, if you're really losing weight quickly, more than a pound or possibly two, if you're someone that's bigger, if you're losing more than that, most likely you're going to be losing some muscle mass with it. So that's a generalization. Um, just so you can have an idea if you don't have any fancy equipment. But so don't lose weight rapidly, and making sure you're doing that time to strength train, put on the muscle mass, and make sure that you are eating enough to maintain your muscle that you have too.
Yeah. Um, so obviously with strength training as well, can you maybe just go deep into or a little bit more into differences for women and men in strength training? I mean, because obviously you specialize in working with women, but you'll know what the differences are as well. So this will help people kind of simplify it and understand it, the differences, and obviously think about it a little bit differently.
Yeah. So when we're strength training, we want our muscle to burn. So when we're feeling that muscle burning, that means the muscle is going to break down, repair, and rebuild. So we can even do body weight exercises, push-ups. That works it for me. Sometimes even squats, or you can sort of do a hold with a squat at the bottom. So we want that muscle burning. So even yoga for strength training, that can be yoga. That can be strength training if you're feeling that burn. So not if you're doing a relaxing yoga class or yin where you're stretching more, but when you're doing a strength-based yoga class and you're feeling that burn. And when we're working with like weights or bands, I like to tell most people to shoot for that 8 to 15 rep with a certain exercise. So there is some science doing a lot heavier weights and up to 5. The only problem with that is really being able to keep good form and not injure yourself. So if you're doing that 8 to 15 rep, that usually puts you in a less stressful spot where you'll be able to keep good form and prevent injury. So what that means is, say I'm doing bicep curls and I'm using 10 pounds. So once I can get to about 15 reps while keeping good form, being able to breathe, then what I want to do next time I do it is bump up the weight. So maybe I'm going to use 12 pounds, but I probably can only do 8 or 10 reps with it. But in the injury prevention, we want to make sure that we're stopping when we no longer have good form. Usually people can do a few more reps, but they'll start compensating or hold their breath or swinging. And when we're doing that, we're past our good form. So even though we can do more, we have to stop when we're not able to keep good form anymore.
Hmm. Yeah, that's I definitely when I'm obviously I've got clients as well, and you do notice these things that you're talking about. The form, just the certain movements in the limbs, or the breathing kind of goes off a little bit. There's not so much flow to the movement. Um, yeah. So with obviously, you train or have trained various women in strength training. What would you say the things that obviously you've mentioned a few things there, but about specifically what women should be focusing on, maybe a little bit more when they're strength training?
Yeah. So everybody's a little bit different what they like to do. But we want to make sure we're strength training at least 3 times a week, because we actually start to lose muscle mass really quickly, like within 48 hours. So if we can get at least 3 strength training sessions in a week and spread those out every other day, that's going to help us to keep that muscle mass. We want to be doing a variety of different exercises because our muscle fibers go in different directions and we want to work them differently with different angles, with different like tempos, and really challenge them and make them do different things because the muscle fibers will respond differently. And so with a lot of clients, a lot of my clients like to do strength training and yoga. So a lot of times we will alternate. We'll have it's traditional strength training with weights, and then we might do some yoga for strength the next day and sort of alternate that. And most importantly, so I said we need to do at least 3 strength training sessions a week, but we also need to keep consistency. So people more likely stay consistent when it's almost a daily habit. So if that's you, you have to think about how can I make this more of a daily habit? So I might alternate the strength and yoga. Maybe I'm going to add a walk or something in there. So you're thinking every day I'm moving my body or I'm exercising instead of like I do it this day, not that day. So I find a lot of people struggle if we're only exercising a few times a week from a consistency base.
Okay, so what I'm gathering here is what you mean, and is if you can maybe explain it, that it's shorter sessions daily. Do you mean like 4 days a week, 5 days a week?
Yeah, so a lot of my clients will do 5 days a week of yoga or strength training and all 30 minutes or less. And it really depends on the person. Like I said at the beginning, I started with 10-minute workouts. And a lot of times when I haven't had clients who have done strength training, we start with 5 or 10-minute workouts for quite a few weeks because we don't want to go in it super hard and get sore and then not like it. We want to
Mhm.
really start slow, let our muscles wake up. We want some soreness, but we don't want to be so sore where we feel miserable. So depending, especially on some people's personalities, they have that like drive. I'm going to push hard. I'm going all
Yeah,
in.
yeah,
Like we actually want to like start slow. I want you to think like that first week or two, okay, this isn't too hard. I can do this. And
yeah,
then slowly bump that intensity up over time. That way
yeah,
we're not overwhelming our muscles and we'll keep doing it too.
yeah. I think that what you mentioned there, intensity over time, is a key thing when you're training new clients, especially because you want to obviously give them something that's challenging, but that's also going to, you know, make them, oh, I'll do this another day. I'll do this another day. I'll keep trying this. And eventually the confidence will build up as well through training. I don't know if you noticed that. You may have noticed that with your clients, the confidence from the start to where they go to is, you notice the differences.
Yeah. Yeah. And I like to, so when I'm training with clients, sometimes we'll start with like 5, 10 minute workouts, like 5 times a day. So I actually use a personal training app. So my clients can do their workouts on their own time because it's hard if you are training live with someone, like, we're just going to do a
Yeah,
10-minute session.
yeah,
Like
yeah, yeah,
people
yeah, yeah,
can't do that. So this app makes it really nice for people to be able to do those shorter sessions.
yeah,
And some people stay at those shorter sessions because they're just so busy and they know that's all they're going to do. And that's
yeah,
okay because
yeah.
it's better to stay consistent with 10 or 15 minutes than not do anything.
Exactly, yeah. And also it's getting in the time, even although it's not 1 hour or half an hour or 45 minutes, at least you're getting in some time and it's more likely possibly it's the quality time is important of the exercise. Um so let's focus. I mean, we can focus again more on the strength training. What sort you spoke about your rep ranges and stuff you use with your clients. Can you go further into that a little bit?
Yeah, like equipment, you mean?
Your rep ranges.
Rep ranges.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
yes. Yeah, like the 18 to 15 rep range. I find that that's a good range for most women. So obviously someone who wants to really put on a lot of muscle and work hard, they're not the people I work with. So if that's what you want to do, then you need to lift heavier weights, do shorter reps, but you have to watch out for injury prevention. So that 8 to 15 rep range tends to be really good. And a lot of times I do 2 sets with clients. Sometimes we can do 3 sets, but usually most of my clients we're keeping the sessions shorter. So we will might have like 2, 3 exercises, go through, do it again one more time, do a second set. I also like to do, once my clients have a really strong foundation of how to do exercises correctly, like they can do a squat correctly, they got their bicep curl, is then I like to also move into compound exercises. So that's where we're doing the arms and the legs at the same time. So it becomes even quicker. You're going to get a little bit of cardio because that heart rate is going to get up because you're doing more movement at one time. But it's important that you have that foundation and you know how to do each exercise correctly and well before you start combining them. But that's a nice way to become a little more efficient when you're exercising, when you're pressed for time.
yeah, I think always focusing on the basics and fundamentals is a key thing when you're training in strength for anybody really. What you mentioned there. I was going to go back to a thing you mentioned earlier actually about muscle fibers. So with obviously strength training, you've got slow muscle fibers and you've got slow twitch muscle fiber and you've got the fast twitch muscle fiber. So when you're training your clients, what predominantly obviously are you looking to work on with them in that case? And and
Yeah,
for women especially, can you explain that a little bit more so people can understand what the differences are maybe?
yeah. Most of the time we're slow twitch. So, however, you have to think what your goal is. So for most of my clients, when I work with them, it's more just to be healthy and to gain some muscle mass. So we almost don't have to be quite as specific. But if we have an athlete who is training for an event or they want to sprint or they need to do something fast, then we're going to need to work the muscles a little more specifically. Um, so most of the time with my clients, that 8 to 15 rep, we're not maxing out, we're not going super fast, we're taking rest. Um, some of my clients do a little bit of HIIT workouts too, so that you might get more of the power, explosive, and those different muscle fibers in there too. But it just depends. I also have some clients who are older in their 60s and 70s, so we're
Yeah,
not going to do jumping or other things with
no,
them. But it goes back to like, what's my goal and what I want to train for. So for example, if you want to run a 5K, you have to be out there practicing running. And the same thing with biking. If you want to ride your bike and do a bike race, you have to practice biking. So even both of those are cardio, you're working
yeah,
your muscles differently. So I've also worked with people who are in the military and they have a physical training test.
yeah,
So we're going to make sure that we're incorporating, they have to do push-ups in a certain amount of time, or they have to do full sit-ups. Like we're going to work on those specific things. Because even though I can work on the core doing plank, it's not the same exact thing as doing a sit-up. So you
yeah,
really have to train for what your goal is.
yeah. So, excuse me. You have to be very specific when you're training for your goals. It's yeah, I would agree with that. Um, Obviously you touched on. I mean, if you want to speak about nutrition, if it's something you work in with your clients as well. So, how do you combine that with your strength training, and obviously does that like combine for your women, obviously that you're teaching for with the strength training?
Yeah, so I have some clients that just do my personal training app, and then I have some that do health coaching too. And even when we do the personal training app, there's habits in there that we can put. So we might be working on some nutrition habits too. But especially like when we're talking about strength training here specifically, and I mentioned at the beginning, is making sure that we're getting enough protein, because protein is really the building block to that muscle. So we want to make sure for breakfast, our body is in a catabolic, a breakdown state. So we want to make sure that we're getting enough protein in that first meal of the day. So 20 to 50 grams, really depending on the person. But we want to put our body in a state during the day where it's no longer breaking down, where we can start building up. So protein becomes important when we're thinking about strength training. Also, as I work with people in weight loss, protein is super helpful too, because it's a very filling nutrient. The same thing with fiber. So nutrition wise, I feel like, again, each client has different goals. And then when we do the health coaching and we're talking on a call, we're able to really break down, because a lot of people are struggling with sugar cravings. They're struggling with this diet culture that we're in. They think they can't lose weight unless they're on a diet, and really breaking free of that and coming back to this place of nourishing our body, doing more mindful eating while still also learning the nutrition basics. Because if we eat like what's around us and what commercials we say, that is not healthy. So really learning the basics of health, how to decrease inflammation in our body, because a lot of people, sugar is very inflammatory. A lot of people have too much omega-6 and not enough omega-3 in their body. And those two things really put our body in a very inflammatory state. So when I'm working with people, I not only want them to lose weight and feel good, but I want them to be healthy on the inside. So in another 10, 20, 30 years, that they are not developing chronic diseases, because that's more important than weight loss or anything specific, is that health going on in the inside of our body.
Yeah, definitely. I totally get that as well because obviously I've had the experience of working with people that obviously talk a bit about that. So yeah, and again with the clients or with in strength training in general with your clients, what sort of so exercise wise and stuff, what sort of things do you work on? The basics like squats, things like that, or how do you train clients?
Yeah, so definitely starting with the basics, starting also with those shorter sessions that I said, but learning how to do squats correctly. There may also be people that lunges bother their knee.
Yeah,
So we may avoid lunges for some people by doing more like straight leg raises, bridges, different things where we're taking that load off the knee. Ideally, we want to be able to work up to those things, but some people it's not quite in the cards for them. but really starting with basic lunges, squats, bicep curls, triceps, really hitting the whole body. And I also love helping people work core because we're in, I don't know about where you guys are, but it's like crunches and sit-ups, which like are not great, especially when it comes to women. So um, if you have heard of diastase recti, that's where sort of the six packs of abs, there's that split between it. So that line down the middle of our stomach vertically. And especially what happens for women or women who have had children is we have this lower stomach muscle and that goes hip bone to hip bone. So we need to learn how to activate that. So we activate our lower abdominal by doing a pelvic tilt, and that brings our six pack of our abs together. And so it's really important because I find with a lot of traditional exercise programs, we're doing things where we lift our heads or sit-ups and we're not engaging that lower ab, and it's actually pulling our abs further apart.
Right.
But this can happen in anybody. I've seen it in kids that I've worked with, men who have bigger pot bellies. They'll have that abdominal separation, and this makes our back weaker. We're more prone to back injury. So we have to learn how to do these ab exercises correctly. After my fourth kid, I didn't do any sit-ups or crunches. And just through training my core correctly, I was able to get my abdominal muscles back together
Oh, nice.
better than they had ever been after any of my other kids. So really learning how to engage this lower core muscle and learning how to really work your core is especially important for women who have had children.
Yeah, so let's continue on that conversation then about the core. Obviously you've said you know pelvic tilt exercises. Can you obviously talk a bit more about what exercises you may use for improving the core with women that have had obviously children and stuff like that?
Yeah, absolutely. And if it's okay with you, I actually have a 5-day free core challenge. If you're able to add that link down below so anyone can get it. It's like 5 minutes a day, but you'll see the video of me. So it's going to
Yeah,
walk you through this. So you guys can check that out. But a pelvic tilt is if you imagine yourself laying on your back with your knees bent, and it's pushing your low back into the mat. So sometimes we'll put our hand where that low back curve is and then pushing down into that. And so what you'll notice when you do that is you want to activate your stomach muscles, not your glutes and your bottom. So you have to check for that because it's easy to compensate. And so that is the very basic thing. So once you learn how to do that pelvic tilt, activate that lower core, then you can start moving to other exercises. But in every ab exercise, you have to be able to do that pelvic tilt and hold it because that is what is holding our abdominal muscles together. And also, when we're thinking of core training, we have to do front and back. So that means we're working our stomach muscles, but we have to work our back muscles. So these muscles connect around our body. And functionally, when we go to pick up things or do different things, we work these together. So we don't want to just work our abdominal muscles. We want to work those back muscles. So that way we're preventing back injuries and we're able to lift things and hold good form too.
yeah, that's great. So yeah, let's continue and obviously like with the core. Initially, you mentioned what was it you said? Sorry, with the pelvic tilt. I was going to ask you, do you recommend, or when you work with your clients, do you recommend uh, using weights to do core, or do you just do it as body weight?
Pretty much just body weight.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is
And
there
really
any?
starting, yeah, once they get that pelvic tilt down, then we're going to start adding things with their feet. Then we might move on to planks. But again, when I do it, I no longer do crunches or sit-ups because it's just not necessary. Now you can eventually get to the point where you have good control and you could possibly add those. But to me, it's like, why even do that if you don't need to?
Yeah. So obviously, let's touch on. Obviously, you said you work with some guys as well. So obviously, with core training, how does it differ between men and women when you train them, or is there a difference?
There is not really a difference. So the same way, I even have a yoga program for men, And it goes back to the same idea. We're going to learn how to do our pelvic tilt because men get that separation in their stomach too. They may not have had a baby that pushes those stomach muscles
Yeah,
out, but that separation can still happen when you do a lot of crunches and sit-ups, because every time you do those and you're not activating your lower core, you're pulling those muscles apart. And men also need to work the front of the body and the back of the body. So for the most part, it's the same. I find most men are a little bit stronger and can maybe bump up to more advanced exercises and things like that. So that would be the only difference that I see. But like when I was talking about the military and the physical training test, they have to do sit-ups. So I'm going to
yeah,
let my clients work on those so they can do well in their tests. Then
yeah,
when they're not in the test, we're just going to go back to doing good core work the way I like.
yeah. So with strength training, let's focus a bit on more on body weight strength training now. And obviously, let's have a chat about that. And what's your thoughts really on body weight strength training and how you maybe work it or how you see it?
Yeah, so definitely I consider yoga body weight strength training when you're doing strength training with it. And you can be doing crescent, my legs are burning. Again, when we talked about muscle fibers, it's going to work our muscles different. So if we're holding a lunge type pose in yoga, we're going to be working different muscle fibers versus if we're using some weight and coming in and out of an exercise. But that's okay to work our muscles differently. Also, body weight exercises, like push-ups can be really hard. Some people may even be working on pull-ups or just hanging from the bar. You might get one rep of those. So there's some different body weight exercises that you can do. You won't have quite as much variety to really burn your muscles out. There's going to be limited exercises where you're really going to be able to burn those muscles out. The other one I really like using is also bands, especially for when people are traveling or they don't have any weights in their house. Bands are a really great way to start because they're cheap and they're small, so you can take them with you as you go places too. And it goes back to that same idea. What can I do that 8 to 15 rep range in, making sure that I'm working different muscles, working all the muscles in my body, and working those muscles in different ways too.
Yeah. You mentioned resistance bands there, or maybe the smaller bands. Which ones were you meaning? Was it the bigger, larger band or the smaller bands?
Both of them. So they do have like those like loop bands that are in a
Yeah,
circle. So
yeah,
sometimes those can be good. There's not quite as many exercises you can do, but those are great to add things for squats or to do, work the side of your hips. You can even do some
yes,
arms if they're the elastic. But I also like the long bands too, because there's exercises you can't do with a circle. So having both of those can be helpful if you're doing more workouts with bands.
yeah. I've obviously used bands as well, and I find them very useful I don't know if you agree, but with for strengthening as well, specific muscle areas.
Mhm.
Especially you can put them on the ankles and have them walking and do glute work and stuff like that.
Yeah, and especially so the one you're talking, if we're putting it around or above our ankles, it could
Just
even
above,
be
yeah,
above the knees. Yeah, we're working the side of our hips. So that's like our glute media. So with a lot
yeah,
of people, especially people who haven't strength trained, we tend to have really weak muscles on the side of our hips. And those muscles keep our hips stable. So imagine one hip dropping, then the other. We use this when we're walking. When we go to stand on one foot, notice if your hip drops or shifts when you do that. That could be a sign of weakness or habit. But that's a really important muscle group to work on with people too, because it definitely gets missed. And it goes back to the idea of learning how to do exercises correctly, because you can come into something that's on one leg and drop that hip and not know if someone's not teaching you how to really stabilize your hips.
yeah. So how when you train your clients also, do you find um with when you've got a new client coming in with hip flexor like hip flexor problems, and obviously, and you can obviously strengthen, it can help that. Yeah, also the band can help. Do you find you get clients with a lot of hip flexor problems?
That a lot of my clients have hip flexor problems. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, or do you find you've got clients that come in and have got hip flexor problems? Because I find that quite a lot as well.
I don't see that too much. And it could just be the different types of people that
Yeah,
we're seeing. But yeah, not too much. I see more people with knee problems or different
Okay.
things like that. So
Yeah,
where we're going to be a little more careful with things like that. But that just brought up in my mind too, is that when we're doing strength training, we also want to make sure that we're stretching. So when we're strength training, we are shortening a muscle. And so at the end, we want to lengthen that muscle and stretch it back out. So this becomes really important because our hip flexors, if we're sitting, they are shortened all day. So we need to make sure that we are stretching those out and that our glutes, the muscle behind it, are strong enough to stretch that out for us too. So it really comes into this balance. I also think that's where yoga is sometimes nice because we're doing
yeah,
strengthening and stretching and balance and all these different things at the same time. But we want to make sure that we are just not strengthening and ending our workout there, that we're adding some of that flexibility in it too, so that we are not going to cause an injury down the line.
yeah. Um, let's move on to the obviously injury prevention and how that comes into strength training. Obviously, what benefit that strength training has for injury prevention.
Yeah, really big. And just as we were talking about the core, really getting our core, front, stomach, and back strong, and knowing how to move and having the flexibility. So when we know how to do squats really well, then we're able to actually pick something up off the floor better because we don't want to round at the back when we're picking something up heavy because that's going to strain our back muscles because our back muscles are small. Our leg muscles, our hips, our glutes, those are big, strong muscles. So when we go to lift something, we want to be able to use those. And there's other ways to pick things up without bending your back. But so we want to be able to train our muscles, make sure they're strong enough, and also make sure we're flexible enough so that we can do functional things in our daily life without injuring ourselves. So I think it's really important. And it also makes us a little more agile, I would say. So um, and also I also include balance training in. So as we get older, we're more at risk for falls and different things like that. So when we can have better balance and better strength in our ankles, and then because we have strength trained, we're just more agile and able to move a little bit better, then I think that's really where our body's stronger and we're less likely to get injured too.
Yeah. So basically, with that, with the strength training, how it helps reduce injury, it makes the body more robust, the muscles more as well as probably as robust as well. Because if you maybe trip one time or fall and your bones, the bone density also will become better. Let's talk a little bit
Yes.
more about that as well. Bone density with the strength training.
Yeah, strength training is huge for bone density. I'm glad you brought that up. And a lot of doctors, when we're getting osteopenia or osteoporosis, they're going to recommend strength training. And it's because we're putting a stress on our bones. So when we put a stress on our bones, it actually makes them stronger. So when we're sitting most of the time, that's not going to happen. So walking, you're going to get a little bit on your leg bones, maybe a little bit on like your hip. But when we do strength training, we're able to hit more bones and put a little bit more force on them to really make them stronger. So, for example, if we're doing swimming, we're not putting that much impact on our bones. So, not that swimming is bad, but from a bone health perspective, we need that strength training and things where we're putting that force on them and it tells our body, let's make this stronger because we want those stronger bones as we're aging, along with those stronger muscles, too.
Yeah. I think the key things from strength training, I think from my side, I don't know if you maybe want to touch on this bit as well, but bone density, certainly muscle development, and even um now, I don't know if what your thoughts on are is with the strength training as well now, or any weight resistance training. You can obviously there is research possibly saying about it's help heart as well.
Help the heart. Is that what you said?
Yeah, yeah. With function.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, definitely exercise helps. Even I was just reading something the other day that strength training, they were testing people who had type 2 diabetes.
Yeah,
And the people who did strength training versus cardio were able to lower their insulin levels more. And this is
Yeah.
that impact muscle's just a lot more metabolic. We're going to
Yes.
burn more calories the more
Yes.
muscle we have. Um, so yeah, exercise is very helpful. And then also will sort of bring inflammation down. It's
Yeah.
just how our body is meant to do. What we don't want to do is overdo it, because some people who are training for long things or different things, it can actually be a stress on your body. So you do want to find that Goldilocks level of how can I exercise and move my body, but I don't want to put it into this stress state, which
Yeah.
increases cortisol and our other stress hormones.
And then obviously once you get into that area of overstress, it then can higher your risk of injury through training as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Because everything's going to be weaker. Like those
Like,
tendon and muscles are going to start to get weaker when they're overused and they haven't had time to rest and recover.
yeah. So let's talk a bit about recovery then. You just mentioned there with strength training. How, what would you recommend or, for strength training, for example, recovery wise, what would you what's your thoughts on it?
Yeah. So it depends. If you're doing the 18 to 15 rep range, I do like to alternate the day. So, like with my clients, we're going to do strength training with weights one day. We're going to do yoga the other day. It might still be strength training, but it's going to work those muscles a lot differently. And so if you're doing a really heavy, you might need a full day off in between to recover.
Yeah,
So a lot of things I use with food or with exercises, it goes back to listening to your body. Notice how you recover. Notice how your muscles are feeling. We want some soreness, but they should be able to recover. And if you did a strength training thing that worked your legs super hard one day, you might need to rest those the next day. So really going back to listening to your body, it depends a little bit how you're working out too.
yeah. I think as well it kind of becomes depends on these sort of variables um with recovery on whatever you're doing in your programs.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think what I would like to ask you about now is, you know, we touched on recovery, we touched on injury. Let's talk about briefly before we start finishing up is a little bit about how nutrition helps when you're strength training for recovery.
Yeah, and that is where it depends how long and how hard you worked out, but that is where also protein becomes important too, making sure you're having some protein after your workout, because that muscle is breaking down and we want to rebuild it and we need that protein to do it. And also, especially with women, I feel like sometimes we use exercise as a punishment, or we want to lose weight and then we may not eat enough. So making sure that you're getting that protein, but also you are eating enough to support that muscle recovery too, and making sure that you are having enough water. If you've been sweating a lot, making sure that you have enough electrolytes too can be important.
Yeah, I think a big thing there you mentioned as well is hydration in the body because if your water intake's not good enough, then you when you're in the gym doing strength training, you'll tire, your concentration will go, your focus is not there, the clarity's not there.
Mhm.
So, I mean, I suppose you tell your clients all that sort of thing about the hydration as well. And obviously, what is your thoughts on that sort of stuff?
Yeah, that's always something I like to check in with, because it's a pretty simple thing. And if people aren't drinking enough, and they start drinking enough, they usually feel a lot better. Their energy's better. So I feel like it's a real easy win to start with. And I like to tell people, usually a good starting rate is half your body weight, or we're in America, so we use pounds and ounces. So that gives you a range to start at. But when you start drinking enough, a lot of people just feel better. And it seems it's like such an easy thing to do.
Yeah, I think it's. I mean, I know myself when I've not drunk enough. You probably do as well. When you get, sometimes you get to that point of like, right, I need to go and get some water or something. The,
Hmm.
the tiredness kicks in, the concentration's not there. So I think you through experience, I noticed it, and probably yourself as well. So I think we're going to finish up there, Michelle, today. Have you got any final message for anyone out there listening to this podcast or my listeners as well?
Yeah, I feel like just start with that next step. I think a lot of times we feel like we have so much we can do that we sort of stay stuck. So, as I talk about on my podcast, Healthy Beyond 40, all the time, it's really finding that next thing that you can do and stay consistent with. And even though you have all these other things you want to do, make sure you're able to start with one or two things and stay consistent and then add those. So, when it comes to the exercise that we've talked about today, is really what is that next thing that you need to do and that you are ready to do? Because sometimes we want to do something, but something's holding us back and we're not quite there. So can we start with something that we're mentally more ready to start with so we can be successful? Because when we're successful, then we build on more success versus when we feel like we're failing and we can't do it and we're missing it, then that keeps us thinking that we're a failure.
Yeah, so the message there, I think, is one step at a time, one habit at a time, right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, Michelle, it's been great to have you on the show today. And hopefully we'll speak to you again soon.
Thanks so much.
Okay, Racket Athlete fans, that's another episode of the Racket Athlete podcast, and we'll speak to you soon.